Hi, so our interactive read aloud will be discussing similes and metaphors and talking about an overall theme of making assumptions. So the book that I will be using is Long Neck and Thunderfoot and was written by Helen Peers. Long Neck and Thunderfoot. Longneck the dinosaur lived alone in the forest. Apart from the birds and other small animals, Longneck seemed to have the whole world to himself. He could potter about all day, and at night he could float on his back in the water watching the stars, and nobody bothered him. Potter is just a fancy word for walking. It means he could trot along, he can go wherever he wanted without being bothered. One evening, Longneck was pottering about as usual when he heard a noise like a clap of thunder. It came from close by. There were sounds of splashing too, and grunts and snorts. Longneck trundled over to see what was going on. He heard a noise like a clap of thunder. Well, that must mean that it's loud, because I've heard thunder before, and it's really loud and a big booming sound. So I know in my head that the noise that he heard was very loud. There, splashing about in the swamp, was another dinosaur. Longneck was very frightened. He had never seen another dinosaur before. "He's so big," Longneck groaned. The other dinosaur was Thunderfoot. Most of his time he spent digging in the mud for roots to eat, or chasing butterflies for fun. Today, Thunderfoot had chased a butterfly far from home. Snorting and grunting, he was trying to keep up with it, and every time he reached out to catch it, he missed it, and his feet banged together, making a noise like a clap of thunder. Well, there's that clap of thunder again. Well, that must mean that it's very, very loud. Then Thunderfoot saw Longneck staring at him. Steam was coming from out of Longneck's nose. He was shaking with fear, and his tail was thumping on the ground. Thump-de-dump, thump-de-dump. But Thunderfoot, who had never seen another dinosaur before, thought Longneck was shaking with anger. "Heavens, it's a fierce monster, and he's thumping his tail at me threateningly." Now Thunderfoot began to shake with fear, and the bony scales on his back clapped and rattled together, making a terrible din. "He's making that rattling din just to frighten me," Longneck thought, and his tail thumped harder than ever. It seems like these two dinosaurs are afraid of each other. Why do you think that they're scared of each other? Take a couple minutes and think, and then share with a partner. During this time, I would allow students a couple minutes to brainstorm, and then we would gather together as a class after they'd shared with a partner and share a couple ideas as to why they think these two dinosaurs are afraid of each other. Longneck and Thunderfoot began to circle around each other warily. They would both have liked to turn their backs and run away, but they were too frightened to do that. "He might attack me when I wasn't looking," they were both thinking. What does warily mean? Well, if they're afraid of each other, when I'm afraid, I'm very, very careful when I'm around the thing I'm afraid of. So maybe warily means to be careful. Interesting. The sun went down and the moon came out, and still the two dinosaurs were facing each other, neither of them daring to take his eyes off the other for a second. Then it began to rain. At last, just for a moment, Longneck took his eyes off of Thunderfoot to watch a trickle of water running down his back. At once, Thunderfoot leapt into the air, and with the head down and horns pointing forward, he turned and ran away. At the same moment, Longneck lifted his tail and, holding it high above his head, ran in the opposite direction. Later that night, Longneck was trying to sleep sitting up under a tree. He couldn't float on his back in the water watching the stars as he usually did, in case Thunderfoot came after him. Tomorrow I must do some strengthening exercises for my tail, he was thinking. Far away, Thunderfoot was hiding under the water, but he kept his eyes at the open air so he could watch for Longneck. Tomorrow I must sharpen up my horns, he was thinking. Next day, Longneck worked hard on his tail exercises, and as his tail got stronger, he began to feel braver. Thunderfoot sharpened his horns. When they were as sharp as two razors, he began to feel more ready to meet Longneck again. Sharp as two razors. Is that really, really sharp or not sharp at all? At this point, I would ask a couple volunteers and see what they said, and hopefully they would make the connection that it means the horns are really, really sharp. Then they both decided to snoop around a bit, just to find out what the other was doing. But when Longneck saw Thunderfoot slicing up a tree with his terrible horns, he didn't feel brave anymore. And when Thunderfoot saw Longneck send a tree topping to the ground with one swipe of his tail, he crept away and hid. But I must do something or he'll come and get me, they each decided, and each of them made a crafty plan. Soon Thunderfoot was digging a deep pit. He was pleased with his crafty plan. When he had finished digging, Thunderfoot trundled up the hill where he waited for Longneck to come along. He'll fall in, and he'll never be able to get out, he grunted. At the same time, Longneck hid in a tree with his tail trailing across the path below. He'll trip over it, Longneck thought, then I'll give him a good swipe and get away quickly. He was pleased with his crafty plan, too. Unfortunately, Thunderfoot didn't trip over Longneck's tail. He sat on it instead. This was very painful for Longneck. He was trying hard not to howl with agony when suddenly the branch on which he was lying gave up, trying to carry 20 tons of dinosaur. It was like an earthquake when Longneck dropped on top of Thunderfoot. The forest echoed and rumbled, and the whole world shook as they rolled down the hill. Then, at last, everything quieted down again. It was like an earthquake. Well, earthquakes are really loud and everything's shaking and shaking, so it must have been what their fall was like. The only noises now were a kind of rattling din and a thump, thump, thump coming from Thunderfoot's deep pit. It was a long time before Longneck heard Thunderfoot speak. His voice wasn't big and bellowing as Longneck had expected. It was a rasping little voice like his own. Are you going to eat me? Thunderfoot was asking. I'm much too frightened to eat anything now, Longneck replied wheezily. Wheezily. I think that means out of breath. Let's act that out. Then I would have the kids act that out at that point. Anyway, I'm a vegetarian. What's a vegetarian? I would ask the kids and see if anyone knew, and I would tell them that it just means that they ate plants. Both dinosaurs were thinking hard now. It's not me you're frightened of, is it? Thunderfoot asked at last. Of course it is, sighed Longneck. Are you frightened of me? Perhaps? Very, said Thunderfoot. Longneck's tail began to thump more slowly, and Thunderfoot rattled only now and then, and at last stopped altogether. That evening, Longneck was floating comfortably on the water. He was very relieved, but he did feel he'd made a fool of himself. Never mind, he thought. He was as frightened as I was. I didn't know I could thump my tail like that. I wonder if I could do it again. Nearby, Thunderfoot was snuggling under the water. But of course, he was telling himself, he was as big as a coward as me. I wonder if I could rattle like that even when I'm not afraid. Next day, he tried and he could. Longneck, too, found he could thump his tail whenever he chose. And then they both had the same lovely, crafty idea. So it happened that not long after, on a clear starry night, the forest echoed with a loud rattling noise and the heavy thumpity-dee dumping of a long tail beating out a rhythm on the ground. Somewhere in the forest, Longneck and Thunderfoot were giving a party, and the birds and all the other animals of the forest had come out to sing and dance together to the beautiful music of the big, friendly dinosaurs. Now let's all get up and have a dance party! Yay! So I would have them get up and play some music and probably just dance to get all their energy out because they'd been sitting for such a long time. And that's the end of the book. So after they were done dancing, I would regroup them, and then we would discuss the conclusion, which is it's really important not to make assumptions about people when you don't know anything about them. And it's important before making assumptions or acting like you know someone, it's important to talk to them and to get to know them as a person first. So that's it.